All right, chat. Domainaria United set review time. I am probably going to separate these, and the talk is going to go starting with whites, but we're going to go in Wooburg style. So white, blue, black, red, green, multicolor artifacts and lands. And really, I'm going to separate them, and I'm going to keep track of the time, and we'll see how far we go. And if I have to separate them by color, then I will. But this is going to be a constructor review. I don't really do limited that much. And this is only going to be stuff that I've skimmed over and stuff that I liked. So there's about 100 cards that I saw that were probably constructed playable, close to, which is a lot. And these are going to be my initial reactions, the majority of them, because I've seen them, but I didn't really get to react to them too much. So without further ado, let's get started. So white. Anointed Peacekeeper. 2 colors, 1 white. Human Cleric, 3/3. Vigilance. As Anointed Peacekeeper enters the battlefield, look at an opponent's hand. Then choose any card name. Spells your opponent's cast with chosen name cost 2 more to cast. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name cost 2 more to cast, or cost 2 more to activate unless they're mana abilities. So this is basically a revamp of every other white 3-drop that's sort of like Elite Spellbinder type stuff, where it's a 3-drop and it taxes the opponent on stuff. The difference between this and Elite Spellbinder is Spellbinder gets the card out of the hand, exiles it, makes it cost 2 more, but doesn't really tax it when it enters the battlefield. And the thing about Anointed Peacekeeper is how it's worded. It doesn't say when it enters the battlefield, it says as it enters the battlefield. So if you cast it and it resolves, you don't get to respond to it when it hits the battlefield. So essentially, if you have removal in hand, you don't get to cast it when it enters the battlefield because as it enters, so when it resolves before it hits play, the first ability is going off. So you don't have time to respond to it. You only have time to respond to it when it's being cast, which I think is rather relevant because if you have a braid or any type of removal spell, you're not going to be able to cast it because it hasn't entered battlefield yet. And you're looking at the opponent's hand to choose because you're choosing it as it enters the battlefield, not when it enters, which is a huge deal. So not only that, but the activated abilities clause is also relevant in that if it's already in play, so it doesn't have to be in hand. So this to me is, it's a worse creature in that it doesn't fly, but the abilities are way better. You don't have to have, it doesn't have to be cards that are already in play or in their hand. Cards that are not around, right? So the opponent could be empty-handed and you name whatever card that you're afraid of the most, and it's going to cost 2 more for them to cast if they draw it, and if it's already in play, then it costs 2 more to activate, unless they're mana abilities. So I like this card a lot for white. It's going to be really annoying, and it's going to get people a lot when it's cast. And you're going to see it, and you're like, why can't I respond to it? Well, because cards already in play.
Thank you for touring Arcadia. I hope you enjoy your stay.
Shadow Cloak. Thank you for the support and the follow. Appreciate it. Thank you for the support. All right. All right, next. Whoops. Archangel of Wrath. 2 white, 2 colorless. Angel, 3/4, flying lifelink. Kicker is back, chat. As if everything is already kicker. However, now it's back for real. Kicker, black and or red. So at most it'll cost 6. Sometimes it costs 5, but you have to pay a red and or black. When Archangel of Wrath enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, deal 2 damage to any target. Let's go on Storm Breath. 2 damage to any target. When Archangel of Wrath enters the battlefield, if it was kicked twice, it deals 2 damage to any target. So essentially, you could deal 4 damage to this if you cast for 5 or for 6 mana, and it has lifelink. So essentially, you can either deal 4 damage or 2 damage, but you have to pay 6 to get the 4 damage, and you have to pay 1 to get the 2 damage, and it'll always gain you life. And this is to any target. So we can deal it to a creature, can deal it to a planeswalker, can deal it to opponent's face, going upstairs, whatever. Usually 4 mana 3/4 flyers aren't bad, and Mardu colors aren't really that big a deal. And if you're not playing Mardu colors and you're only doing red, you still have Fable, and this is when it enters the battlefield, so you can you can't pay the kicker, obviously, but this isn't a legendary creature, so you can get a bunch of 3/4 flying lifelinkers. I like this a lot for white also. It's also an angel, also curves well into the 3-drop angels, which we don't have anymore, but it's still an angel and it's still relevant. Not sure how good this would be in older formats, but standard, it's still fine. And the reason why the majority of these cards are being looked at is a lot of the cards, even in the older sets, were soft banned because of how good the decks were, like Jeskai Inada and many other decks that would just plow you, right? I think the format's going to slow down a lot, and cards like this in the mid-range shells are going to be a little bit better than they used to be. Banalish Sleeper, 1 white, 1 colorless, kicker black. When Banalish Sleeper enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, each player sacrifices a creature. Fleshbag Marauder was a playable Magic card at one time, and usually 3 1s for 2 are not bad. And not saying that they're better or that 3 mana Fleshbag Marauders are good, but in typical human white aggro decks, you're going to have a lot of creatures in play. And if you're interacting with the opponent, the Banalish Sleeper, Fleshbag Marauder type stuff might actually get a pesky creature. I would most likely probably see this in a sideboard of some sort, but that doesn't mean that it can't be played because 3 1s are still good. And it's also a human. So also a soldier, which will come up here soon, of why human and soldier are relevant creature types, which they usually are, and not just standard, but and also on in older formats as well. Ironic that it's called a sleeper because this might actually be good. Denethor Benalius Hope, 4 colorless, 1 white, legendary human knight, 4/4, first strike, vigilance, and lifelink. When Denethor enters the battlefield, you may put in aura or equipment from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield attached to Denethor. This thing costs too much, chat. And while I understand how good this is, like how good it could be, 5 is pretty steep. And with all the keywords, that you would want to have something like the first thing that came to mind in my head was Embercleave. Problem is that Embercleave's not in standard anymore. So another card for 5 mana. You can attach Hammer to this, Colossal Hammer. But these are all in Explorer Pioneer. Standard, I have no idea what you're doing with this card, especially when it costs 5. Yeah, Rabbit Battery gives it haste, but like that's still a lot of mana. And if it's in play, you can't really attach it. I guess if it's in the graveyard, but it's still like 5 mana is a lot. So, yeah, it's probably fine, but still, this card costs way too much. If it costs like 4, and it was like a 3/3 with these keywords, maybe, or a 3/4, but 5 is a lot of mana. Defiler of Faith. So this is a set, or rather a cycle. Each color has one of these. 2 white, 3 colorless, Phyrexian human, vigilance 5/5. As an additional cost to cast a white permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. So essentially, when this is in play, every one of your white permanent spells now has 1, not many, but 1 Phyrexian mana pip. So instead of, for example, since this is not legendary, if you have this in hand, it's not 2 white anymore. It's 1 white and 1 Phyrexian white mana. And that white mana, Phyrexian mana, is either pay 2 life or tap that. 1 less to cast if paid the life this way. This effect reduces only the amount of white mana you pay. So if it was, for example, a white spell, but it was only 6 colorless, this would not work, for example, which doesn't matter in standard, but in older formats it might. Whenever you cast a white permanent spell, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. 5 mana is a lot for a 5/5. That really doesn't impact the board the moment it hits play. And I'm skeptical in the majority of these defilers, except maybe 2 of them. But the white one, not really impressed by this. And as you get into older formats, this doesn't really do much for you either, especially when it costs 5. I think there's much better things you can do in white that are better than this. If you're find a way to reduce cost. But again, in older formats, you have like Oketra's Monument and stuff like that to reduce the creature costs, which might matter, but you don't really have that in standard. Destroy Evil, 1 white, 1 colorless, instant, choose 1, destroy target creature with toughness 4 or greater, or destroy target enchantment. We see these a lot. Valorous Stance is the most prominent. Anytime that you have a spell that's a removal spell, but also is a sideboard option where it's a very good, I'm drawing a blank here, a very good flexible removal spell where it doesn't just target creatures, but also other stuff, it deserves a look. And Valorous Stance is already good in that it deals with some creatures in the format like Rafine. This also deals with it, but destroying enchantments might actually be relevant. I think artifacts are a little bit more relevant than enchantments are, so maybe this is a little bit too cute. But Valorous Stance might be the more relevant spell in the format. But this also, like I said, you can. It's no big deal. You can hit enchantments with this as well. Older formats, you have better things to do than this, but in standard, this is playable. This might come up if a lot more enchantments are being used. Guardian of New Benalia, 1 white, 1 colorless, 2/2 human soldier. Enlist is a new mechanic for the set. Enlist says, as this creature attacks, you may tap a non-attacking creature you control without summoning sickness. When you do, add its power to this creature's add its power to this creature's until the end of turn. Whenever Guardian of New Benalia enlists a creature, scry 2, discard a card, Guardian of New Benalia gains indestructible until end of turn, tap it. So enlist is the new mechanic for the set. If you read it correctly, it's a non-attacking creature that does not have summoning sickness, and you only get the power. You don't get power and toughness. It's basically a revamped version of banding, and while the library manipulation is relevant, enlist seems to me like it seems to be a limited mechanic. Yeah, you can increase the power of your creature if you don't want to make profit or non-profitable attacks, but non-summoning or summoning sickness creatures are really when you want to use it. And not being able to use creatures you just cast are like, it's just not, I see corner cases where enlist is going to be relevant. The majority of the time it's just going to be a limited mechanic, in my opinion. This card's fine. But I don't know. I think this one's a lot worse than here are the Season Hollow Blade, for example. And if you're enlisting, does the Scry 2 matter? So, whatever. It's fine. But it's nothing to write home about. Leyline Binding, 5 colorless, 1 white, enchantment, flash, domain. Domain is back, chat. All right, Domain has returned. For those who don't know what Domain is this spell costs 1 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. So effectively, if you have a white source, it becomes a 5-drop. If you have all 5 basic land types, it becomes a 1-mana removal spell with flash. When Leyline enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Leyline Binding leaves the battlefield. So basically, if you have a Triome, this costs 3 less. The problem is with this card, in Standard specifically, is how many times in a 2-color or 3-color deck are you going to have Triomes? And that's really the question. Triomes are good, but how good are they? In older formats, this is a lot more relevant than in Standard. I don't know if this is modern playable. However, it's not really hard to turn on. If you have a white Triome on turn 1, on turn 2, you can get a non-white Triome, and it's a 1-mana removal spell, like flat out. In Historic, same thing. Now, you don't have fetches in Historic, but you're playing 5-color already, so to play this is not hard. And in Explorer, specifically speaking to arena formats, it doesn't seem that hard to make this into an Oblivion Ring. And also in Explorer, this pairs really, really well with the 4 or 5-color Enigmatic Incarnation decks, where you can reduce this to 3 with all of your Triomes and basics. You just have to play a little bit more basics and a lot more like shocks. And now you have a spell that you can sacrifice to Incarnation and get 7 drops. And there are a lot of good 7 drops, like Agent of Treachery and Titan of Industry and Coma and many other 7 drops. All right. In Standard, corner cases of reducing it by 2 to make it cast down, but it doesn't cycle, but it has flash. So I think this is one of those cards that are just like kind of like rounds out your curve of like 1s or 2s of, where you're like, I need to deal with something, and this is what it deals with. And as the formats get older and you're able to get Domain a lot easier, is it worth putting Triomes for Domain cards? Absolutely. But it's not worth it in aggro decks, for example, where you need your lands to come into play untapped. But in mid-range and control decks, it's like free, because you're not doing anything on turn 1. So if you're playing multiple Triomes, it's fine, right? Resolute Reinforcements, 1 white, 1 colorless, human soldier, flash, 1/1. When Resolute Reinforcements enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white creature or white soldier creature token. Chat, for some of you that don't know, I used to love, and still do, but you can't play it in Historic anymore. I used to love tokens, and I used to play it a lot. Made it to Mythic a few times with tokens specifically. It's very good against control decks because you go so wide they can't deal with your stuff. But this is a creature that gives you basically a raise the alarm effect, but it's on a creature and you get an extra 1/1. There are a couple of cards there's one card that's being spoiled later in the spoiler, and one already in Standard, where if you If you put 2 creatures into play on a turn, you draw a card. So if you have this and a way to raise the alarm or put 2 creature tokens into play, like this card, or join the dance, or green white anything, which also is the creature, the stupid hippogriff or the Pegasus, where you deal combat damage, and if you put 2 creatures into play before combat or during that turn, you draw a card. Well, there's another creature that's in blue white that does the same thing essentially, and this sort of helps that. And the more cards you draw, you don't really care about the 1/1s because you're drawing extra cards. And if you're playing some of the other cards in this set, this can get big pretty easily. Yeah, I like this card a lot. It's a lot better than people think it is, and I think this will actually see play. Corner cases in, go wide strategies more often than the straight up just beatdown plan. But this is still relevant. Not so much in Orla formats, just specifically in Standard. Runic Shot, 1 white, sorcery, kicker blue, destroy target tapped creature. If this spell was kicked, scry 2. Chad, you don't get very many removal spells from white. This card costs 1. Granted, it's a sorcery, but this says any creature. And the flavor text is awesome. Target acquired. This card seems really good. Not like, the best removal spell good, but it's 1 mana. Destroy any creature. You don't see that too often, and there's no downside either. Usually when you see cards like this, it's like you have to do this and the opponent gets to put a 2/2 creature token into play. This one is just destroy a tapped creature. And if you have an extra blue laying around, you get to scry. This card seems really, really good. In Standard specifically. And I wouldn't be surprised if I saw this as a 1 of or a 2 of. That's just like randomly like, yep, I need removal spells and I need them to be cheap. And this deals with basically everything. Can Gruul run both Naya and Jund Triumphs? Yeah, but it has to be mid-range. Yeah, I like this card a lot. Sarah Paragon, 2 white, 2 colorless creature or angel, flying, 3/4. Once during each of your turns, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with 3 or mana value 3 or less from the graveyard. If you do, it gains when this permanent is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, exile it, and you gain 2 life. Chat, this card's good. Anytime you get cards that say put stuff into play from your graveyard and you may cast them, you don't care if they get put into exile because you get the value from them. And if for some reason you're able to blink them, they lose that permanent, because it's not perpetual like it would be in Explorer, Historic. And this is 1 more than Lurrus, and it's 1 extra mana value than Lurrus. And as you all know, Lurrus is a busted magic card. Now, granted, you always had at least 1 in your sideboard to get, but if you play 4 of these, because it's not legendary, you could do it multiple times. And you don't really care about the land portion, you care about the mana value 3. And it's just permanent spell, chat, not creature. So, Lilianas, Kaidos, Chandras, the 3 mana Chandra, Dress to Kill, vehicles that are 3 mana value or less. There's a couple of white permanent spells that we haven't spoiled yet that are relevant that go with this. Yeah, this card's really good. And it has evasion. So, look for this to see play. Especially in mid-range shells, obviously. I'm not sure if this is an aggro finisher or not, because the aggro finisher of choice right now is Wandering Emperor. But I wouldn't be surprised to see this, because you can buy back, say, Adeline's. Alright? So, funny enough, it brings back Lurrus. Yeah. Which also is relevant. Temporary Lockdown. 2 white, 1 colorless enchantment. When Temporary Lockdown enters the battlefield, exile each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less until Temporary Lockdown leaves play. If you hated Divine Purge in Historic and Alchemy, let me explain to you how this card is not nearly as oppressive as Divine Purge. All right, Divine Purge is anything. All right, lands, artifacts, enchantments, and creatures. And they perpetually gain +2 to the cost. And they come into play tapped. This one is just mana value 2 or less. And it's only when this is in play, when it leaves play, all the stuff comes back. Albeit if they're food tokens or treasure tokens or whatever, they don't come back. But this one is fine for a white mass removal spell for permanence. And imagine if it was mana value 3. I would be much better suited for having it have this text as opposed to mana value 3. So this card's fine. I think this is a lot better in older formats too, where this stuff is a lot more efficient. You know, like in Pioneer or Explorer, for example, where you're having a hard time with, say, food. This deals with all their food stuff, like Trail of Crumbs, Cat Oven, their food tokens, etc. Or a very, very low to the ground aggro deck. And this doesn't target, so it's like you can't really stop this from happening, and it says exile, so there's no indestructible shenanigans. This card's really good. I'm not sure how good it is in Standard. But as the formats get older, this is basically Divine Purge. Obviously tamed, but in older formats, this seems to be very, very well suited. Urza assembles the Titans. Sagas are back, chat. And there's a little twist to them. 3 colorless, 2 white. Read ahead. Choose a chapter and start with that many lore counters. Add 1 after your draw step. Skipped chapters don't trigger. Sacrifice after chapter 3. So you can start at chapter 1, or you can put it into play and say read ahead and put that many lore counters. So you can put it at chapter 3, you draw, and the chapter 3 triggers, and then it sacrifices. You can put it at chapter 2, and chapter 1 doesn't trigger. If you put it on chapter 3 automatically, chapters 1 and 2 don't trigger. The first chapter is Scry 4. Then you may reveal the top card of your library. If a Planeswalker card is revealed this way, put it into your hand. You may put a Planeswalker card with mana value 6 or less from your hand onto the battlefield. You may activate, and in chapter 3 is you may activate the loyalty abilities of Planeswalkers you control twice this turn rather than once. This card seems okay. The issue is how good are Planeswalkers from 6 or less? And the best Planeswalker at 6 mana value or 6 mana or less was Professor Onyx, and that rotated. So I don't know how good this is. And I'm sure we're going to see mana. They would not put mana value 6 or less on this if there was not going to be a 6 mana Planeswalker in future sets in Standard. And in older formats, yeah, this is fine, but it costs too much. And your first chapter is you look at something, so it's not affecting the battlefield the moment it hits play. And the third chapter incentivizes you to play a lot of Planeswalkers, and there's not very many in Standard. So I'm not sure how good this is, but it'll remain to be seen. It just depends on the Brothers' War and many other sets after this, that this will be in Standard, or the shelf life will determine how well this plays out. But 5 mana is still a lot. Valiant Veteran, 1 colorless, 1 white. Core Soldier. Other soldiers you control get +1/+1. 2 white, 3 colorless. Exile Valiant Veteran from your graveyard. Put a +1/+1 counter on each soldier you control. 2/2 creature. This is a cycle, and the white one is soldiers. Imagine if it said humans. This card's good. The flavor text on this, I don't think really matters that much, but it is relevant. The issue is how many soldiers after rotation are there? And I'm pretty sure it's like less than 5. Plus this, that's including this card. So, There are token strategy. Now, the tokens all put soldiers into play. The majority of them, not all of them. All the ones from New Capenna, it's either New Capenna or Kamigawa that are citizens. So maybe, but there aren't that many soldiers in standard. The majority of them rotated, and not all of the good token generators are soldiers. The ones in this set are, but not all of them. The good token generators are, Adeline doesn't even put soldiers into play, which is ridiculous. And Adeline's a knight. So good luck. Like, there's not very many soldiers. Like, it's good, but All right. We're going to go into blue. Actually, no, we're not. I'm going to cut that out. But, all right. So that's why we're 30 minutes in. So I think I'm going to cut these by color, because I'm going to talk about them a lot more than all the other, like each set or whatnot. So YouTubers, like, comment, subscribe, all the socials in the description below, Twitch, Discord, and all that. Don't forget live streams. Click the link below. Do all the YouTube stuff, and appreciate everybody. Do all that stuff, and we'll see you in the next one. Blue is next if you want to see it. All right.